something like God is faithful and that the fruit of the Spirit is, what does that mean? So, of course, I Googled, because you can do it, and it was super unhelpful. Because it basically, when it said faithfulness, it said the act of being faithful. How good is that for a definition, right? So we're not going to really talk about faithfulness. We're just going to talk about being faithful. Because we're talking about it in terms of who is, because all of these are fruit of the Spirit, right? God gives them to us. God does something for us as we abide in Him. And so, as we begin with faithfulness and the idea of what it means to be faithful, if you read, I don't know if you guys even open and read our Friday updates and read my sermon like blurb things about what's coming. I said, what do you think about, in the question I asked, what do you think about when you think of faithfulness? And I said two examples. I said, do you think of a geyser in the faithful, loyal dog, perhaps? And as I was thinking about, I just wrote that out kind of randomly. And as I was thinking about that, one of those two things actually is a good description of God and His faithfulness, and one of them is a little bit lacking. So we're going to do a survey. I'm going to call on you because you guys have the answers. At least you have your ability to raise your hand. How many of you think God is more faithful like a geyser? If you think God is a geyser kind of example, raise your hand. I got a couple. Okay, so how many think God is faithful like a dog? Raise your hand. Oh, the dog wins. How many of you have no idea and you just want to raise your hand because it's like raise your hand? All right, there we go. My kids in the back raise their hand. Well, as I was thinking about it and unpacking faithfulness of God, you're going to be happy, all of you who voted for the geyser. Huh? How is God more like a geyser than a dog? Well, when you think about a dog is trained to be faithful, right? A dog is one who has actions done that builds up a behavioral pattern of faithfulness. And when we think about faithfulness, it's the idea that the dog will come when you want him to come. He'll sit when you ask him to sit. He'll show up when you ask him to show up. He'll be around you. But if you just know regularly, a dog that you randomly meet on the street, he won't do those things for you, will he? Right? It takes actually involvement, investing, and training. And the problem with that in God is, well, in that sense, God becomes somebody that we train, that we tell him how to sit and behave. We ask him to roll over. We want him to do the tricks for us, right? And so while for sure the presence and loyalty of God, don't get me wrong, there is faithful, the things that are true about God. The reason why I think the geyser is more apropos of what it means to be faithful is this. Do you know the last time? Well, first question, how often does Old Faithful blow? Do you know how often it goes off?
More or less on the hour.
More or less 90 minutes. 90 minutes, so plus or minus 10 minutes. I didn't know that. I had to Google it. When was the last time the geyser didn't go according to plan? Do you know? 1970. And it was like a one-off. Do you know the last time historians, and I don't know how they know this, scientists say that there was a big disruption of the geyser? 12th and 13th century, when evidently there was some big drought in the Wyoming area, and so there wasn't enough water to shoot out. And so the reason why I think that the geyser represents God's faithfulness is because the faithfulness of the geyser is a certain integrity. And what do I mean by that? The faithfulness of the geyser isn't dependent on any external outcomes. That is to say, if all of us were to go on a big field trip and have church up at Yellowstone and sit there and watch, the geyser would go off. And at 2 o'clock in the morning, when nobody's up watching it, what happens to the geyser? It goes off, right? It's faithful in its actions, irregardless of who shows up or what people think about it or do about it. And this is how I think it's helpful to think about the faithfulness of God. God is faithful not primarily to us, but to himself. That's kind of an interesting thought, but here's how we unpack it. What it means is that God's faithfulness doesn't begin in relation to us. He is faithful and consistent. He has integrity to be who he says he's going to be and do what he says he wants to do, irregardless of circumstances, irregardless of anything. God is faithful, we read Paul say in 1 Corinthians, and the faithfulness is connected to his being exactly who he is, consistently and with integrity in all times and all situations. which is good news, because when we start to unpack the character of God, these are all things that tell us about his faithfulness. So when you think of God, what are some characters, some characteristics about God that you can think about? Name some of them, shout some of them out. What are characteristics of God?
Good.
He's good, right? So God is good. We talked about goodness a couple weeks ago. What do you think, Abby?
Loving.
He's loving, right? Good. What other things do you think about with the character of God? Merciful, right? That's super important to us, right? Because we need mercy times. What do you think, Hannah? He's caring, good, right? We can recognize that there's all sorts of these characters of and characteristics of God, and his faithfulness is that he's consistently these things. And isn't that good news, right? Could you imagine, for example, if God said, today it's a Monday, I don't like Mondays, I'm not going to love you today. Or, it's a Wednesday, it's hump day, and I'm tired from all the work of forgiving all you sinners. I'm not going to do it today, I'm just done. Right? That would be unfaithfulness, and he wouldn't be faithful to who he says he is. And so, like a guy, the guys are old faithful, God is faithfully doing these things consistently for us. But as we reflect on that, you might see that God is consistent and faithful to us. And when we talk about faithfulness as a fruit of the Spirit within us, I'm not always faithful to God. I don't know about you. Well, I do know about you. I'm your pastor. You're not always faithful to God either, right? There's times where we make promises. There's times where we say we're going to. There's times where we know what we should do and we fail. And so, how do we unpack faithfulness? Is it an expectation that you and I are perfectly consistent with integrity in all things we do? Yes and no. So let's start with the no. Okay, so another way that we can actually think about faithfulness and faithful is to switch them around and to recognize for us as Christians, it starts with us being full of faith. So the primary thing that I think faithfulness for us as Christians, it grows and centers around is being full of faith. And what does that mean? Well, it means that we are full of trust. I think faith becomes an object sometimes of like conceptual ideas. We think about what we believe, which is good and important, but at its heart, faith is a trust in God. Faithful is to be fully trusting in God. And so I wanted to tell you a story of what we see in the Bible about how a person was both faithful and faithless and how God responded to that. It's from the book of Matthew, chapter 14. It's the story where Jesus has just fed 5,000 people, and he finds out at that point that his cousin, John the Baptist, has been beheaded, which is pretty awful, right? Just that somebody you know is his cousin. So he tells his disciples, go ahead and cross the lake. I'm exhausted by doing all this care, and I need some time alone in solitary prayer and just moments to be with God. And so the disciples cross the lake, and it's a nighttime, and they're going across the lake, and a storm comes up. Maybe you know this story of where it's going. It's this storm that's bad enough that the disciples, many of whom were fishermen on Lake Galilee, were afraid. It was probably a squall, some sort of really terribly strong storm that was scaring even hardened fishermen. Maybe, we don't know the backstory, but maybe, just maybe, these are the kind of storms that took out fishermen back in the day. That these would be the kind of storms where a boat would go out and never return, and bodies would be discovered later floating in the sea. Maybe this is why the disciples were afraid. And so they're digging and rowing, and the wind is blowing, and lightning is cracking, and they're the tallest thing on the sea, and so you can imagine the lightning striking nearby, and they're digging in, and they're not getting very far because the wind and the waves are against them. You can imagine they're rowing as hard as they can, they're stressing out all their muscles, they're exhausted, and so people are jumping in and taking turns rowing. And suddenly, in the middle of this, there appears to be a ghost behind them. Do you know this story? Where Jesus is walking on the water to them. Again, we who live in the 21st century, where dinosaurs are real in Jurassic Park movies, and Neo can bend bullets and do all those things, right? With CGI world, we can conceptualize another story. But for them, in the first century, when somebody's walking on the water, what do they say must be happening? It's a ghost. It has to be a ghost, right? And so they're digging in harder. They're even more afraid. They're afraid that something's chasing them, and they're afraid of the storm that's in front of them. And so they're just not doing well. You can imagine how, like, they're splashing water, their water splashing on their face, and they like go like this, and they look back, and they see this ghost getting closer and closer, chasing them down. At some point in the process, the disciples, we don't know, again, the Bible's often very scant. They don't give us all the details. But I imagine they started whispering themselves, he's getting closer. There's somebody probably watching who's like real detail oriented, and every moment he's getting afraid. And then at one point, they probably started whispering, that looks like Jesus. That looks like Jesus. That can't be Jesus. Well, it is Jesus, right? And so Peter, I love Peter, because he thinks second and speaks first. Do you know what I'm talking about? And Peter, he says, Lord, if it's you, call me out on the water. You know what I think Peter did as soon as he said that? He went like this. Oh, what did I just say? Right? Because he could have said a lot of better things if he had time to think about it, don't you think? Hey, Jesus, you're scaring us to death. Can you stop the storm? Hey, Jesus, this isn't a cool party trick. Can you get in a boat? Right? We're not liking this. We're not digging this. Instead, he shows faith. He shows a trust, right? A deep trust. Jesus, if this is you, call me out. I always like to think that Jesus has one of those Neo looks. You know Neo from, like he does like the little thing, and from the Matrix. And so Peter, he steps out of the boat. Can you imagine that moment where you actually hit something firm instead of water? You know how you go down? A couple years ago at our cabin, I was fishing. I got a lure stuck, and I thought that I had about a foot deep water, and I stepped down, and it was 4 feet deep water, and I went whoosh, and I went whoo, because it was ice cold snowmelt water. And you think Peter thought that that's what was going to happen to him, right? And instead, he kind of, right, and he gets his other foot out, and he starts looking at Jesus, and he's walking step by step, and he's getting to Jesus. And I can just imagine, like, all the disciples going, right? They don't even think about the wind and the waves, and that's secondary, because they're watching Peter do something faithful, full of faith. Then, of course, we know how that story continues, don't we? He takes his eyes off of Jesus because he sees the wind and the waves, the things that cause doubt and fear and erode faith, and what happens? He goes down. Seems that he was close enough to Jesus and far enough from the boat that he was really in trouble. That it wasn't like he could get back to the boat. Probably the boat had moved some and he had moved some and Jesus was somewhere. There's some distance. And so what I have here is actually a painting that's in my office. It's one of my favorite paintings that I've ever seen. It's about this moment from the perspective of Peter. This is a painting called Save Me the Hand of God, and it's from a South Korean artist. And what I love about it is it's looking from under the water up. Does that make sense? Can you see that? Maybe you can see how the feet there are above the water. They're on there, and the hand is broken through the water. You see that? And what I love about this painting is that it shows a moment where Peter isn't just struggling, he's drowning. That he's so overwhelmed and so afraid that he's locked up and can't do the things he knows how to do. And the reason I say that is because in John 21, on the after the resurrection, there's this moment where Jesus is on the shore. He says, hey, go fishing on the other side of the boat. Do you know that story? And they throw the net on the other side. They catch 153 fish. Somebody counted. And Peter hears one of the other disciples say, hey, that's Jesus. And what does he do? He puts on his outer clothes, because he was stripped down to the waist for work. He puts on his clothes as right to be in the midst of a rabbi. And he jumps out of the boat and he starts swimming, leaving all the other people to take care of the fish. And so this picture demonstrates it when Peter is so afraid, so unfaithful, faithless almost, that he's drowning. Do you see that? He doesn't even know to do the things that he normally knows how to do. And that's why I love this painting, because sometimes in life we can feel a little bit like Peter, not so full of faith. But this is where we see God's faithfulness. Look at the picture here. I don't know if you can see it. Come up after the service if you can't see it. The face of Jesus isn't really upset by this. He's kind of nonplussed. What is the storm to the guy who created the heavens and the earth? And what is this moment to the one who can make anything happen? He's not angry. He's not bitter. He's not like disappointed. His face is like, I gotcha. And I love this is showing the faithfulness of God. This is a metaphor for us. When we aren't faithful, God is. God's faithfulness reaches down and rescues us. This is the very nature and character of God. We talked about mercy. This is what mercy looks like. The God who rescues and saves. But then we see faithfulness of Peter again. He's pulled out, and if you know the rest of the story, what happens is he walks with Jesus all the way back to the boat. The rest of his journey with Jesus, he's there. And we don't know what happened. We don't know if he's holding on to Jesus like physically. I kind of like to think that Jesus is whispering to him through each step. Just one more step, Peter. I got you. Don't worry, Peter. I'm with you. It's okay, Peter. I got you already once. I'll get you if you go down, but you're not going to go down because I'm here. And he makes it all the way to the end of the boat, and then that's where the storm stops. And I like that Peter is restored so that he can be faithful again. And so we see faithfulness starting with being full of faith, with a God who meets us when we aren't to restore us back to being faithful to him. So primarily, faithfulness doesn't have to do with anything we do, but rather our trust in God before we even make any moves in life. Does that make sense? But there is a second part of faithfulness, which is in the second story, or the second parable that I want to talk about, the second story. That was a gospel lesson from Matthew 25, where Jesus tells his story about three different, and the word I want is up here. I was asked, is this Cyrillic? Well, no, it's actually Greek. This is the word. Let's see if I can make that happen so that they'll stay up, okay? That word doulos is the word describing those three servants, but that word has both, the word in Greek has an image of servant, but also a slave. So it has a much deeper context. And the context really, and we shouldn't put in the mind of us as Americans, 19th century American slavery. That's not what we're talking about. It's a different context. But it is this idea of being more connected to the master than just like a hired hand. There's a deeper relationship, there's a deeper expectation, there's a deeper reality and trust. In the Roman world, oftentimes these servants were part of the household. Oftentimes these people indentured themselves to rich owners because they were bankrupt and they needed help. And so they had a relationship where they said, we will work off our debt over this certain amount of times and I will be your doulos, your slave, your servant. This is kind of some of the imagery that happens in the Roman world. This is what Jesus about. It's a deep connection of sharing the life of the master. And so in this parable, there was three guys, right? The one who got 5 talents, the one who got 2, the one who got 1. And the first 2 were faithful. Why? Because they knew what their master wanted, and they lived accordingly. They were living under the integrity of the master. We know what you want, and we're going to follow your desires and your wishes in our life. Does that make sense? They were being faithful because of that. The third one, what did he do? He did nothing. He knew what he was called to do, and he said, I would rather do what I want to do rather than what my master wants me to do. And he was not full of faith, full of trust that the master's ways were best, and he acted and lived accordingly. And so we see here then a second understanding of what faithfulness looks like. Faithfulness isn't just being full of trust, but faithfulness is also living out that trust in the world around us. So we as Christians, when we say, God, give us faithfulness, it means to be full of faith into difficult situations. To love our neighbors when they're hard to love. To be kind to each other and forgive those who have wronged us. To be a servant rather than to be served. To put our expectations lower and to do with the will of God. To be missionaries, not just in Yemen or other places around the world, but in our contexts, in our situations. God calls each of us to see that we carry out God's will faithfully as we love God with all of our hearts and love our neighbors. As we speak that love to other people, as we forgive, as we serve, as we act out what it means to be faithful, full of that trust in the one who gives us everything. So friends, we are called to grow in this fruit. And as I've been saying every week, here's how it happens. we abide, we stay with Jesus. Because there we hear this mercy story again and again. He says, I know what you did this week, and I still love you. Because I'm faithful, I'm always full of integrity, and I will do what I continually say I will do. So come back to me. Come to my meal. Come and to the worship, and where we say we're a poor mess. And he says, yeah, I know, but I forgive you and love you. And as that faith is filled within our ears, it shapes our heart to trust him more and to live that out. And so we abide in Jesus, the one who has been, who is, and who will always be faithful to us, so that we might be full of faith to live it out in the world. In Jesus' name, amen. At this time, I'm going to invite my girls to come up and get offering plates. We're going to hand out an offering and collect our offering as a gift to the Lord, and also a way to serve our church's priorities of sharing the gospel.